Hello, Think Well Universe. This is
Hello,
George with my wonderful co-host, Laura. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's
Yeah?
been a pretty crazy couple of weeks at work and just everything. So
Everything is crazy?
yeah, it just
Yeah.
feels a little crazy. Work, family, just a lot. So
Commitments? Yeah, it's a busy time of the year, right?
it is. It is. And there's, I found myself yesterday feeling so anxious, and I haven't felt like that in decades. So and I know I was pushing myself because I'm the type of person that if I have to be somewhere in an hour, I will do 20 things before that. I know I pack a lot of things into my schedule. So that was one of the days. Yesterday was that day where I overdid it, and then I didn't eat. So my whole body was just internally shaking, but I was composed. And it really got to me. So I'd like to talk about anxiety. Like that was maybe a couple hours worth of so much tension and anxiety for me. So yeah, I do have a couple questions for you with respect to that, because I mean you're very knowledgeable about anxiety.
Well, it's my expertise, right?
Yeah, and
it's
that's your
where
practice.
that's what I do, right? Help my participants with anxiety. I write about anxiety. I think about it all the time. I have a couple of courses that I teach that are around anxiety, and so yeah. I mean, like I'm kind of as you're telling me about the way you're feeling and kind of what brought it on. I'm already thinking, well, maybe you can adopt this or the other technique type of thing. But
Yeah.
I can definitely talk about that. I mean, anxiety is it's a very broad thing, right? It's anxiety could be something like what you're experiencing that's very, I would say, of course, low level. It comes every once in a while. I guess you were able to really identify where it was coming from. You kind of induced it yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Self-induced anxiety. But yeah, there's definitely things you can do about that, and then you can use them in the future. But then there's anxieties that seem to be there all the time, and that's what people sometimes attribute to other things. And sometimes those are the symptom of something else that's an underlying situation, not necessarily a condition, an underlying situation, circumstances that can create that anxiety, right?
Yeah, so one of the techniques that I use all the time, and I always share with all of my yogis, is deep breathing, Nadi Shodhana, which is a beautiful breathing technique of breathing in each nostrils, and that really helped. And also just reminding myself, I've got this. I've got this, right? It's not life-threatening, but at the moment, at the time, it does feel life-threatening. So my question to you is, for someone that doesn't have the tools, and I know it's different for everyone, but what would you offer to someone that is experiencing this, not like me, where it's necessarily one-time self-induced? Like, what would you recommend to your clients, your participants?
Yeah, it's very specific to the individual, depending on how they're approaching it, or what they're concluding about their anxiety. But there's a combination of things, and they're all equally effective and valid. So, for example, you mentioned breath work. That's something that I definitely like to talk about, it just to some degree of some length. That works very well, and it's something that's very popular, and people have heard about that. So even if somebody hasn't practiced it yet, something they can embrace, and it's very easy to access something like a yoga class or a breathwork class, or go online and look at something like that. But I'll talk about the importance of that and how that works, and see if it is something that will work for you, for example, right? Now, I'm also looking at other things. So when you describe that situation, you described what I refer to. So I work with thinking modes, right? So there's many ways of thinking, and it's often our own thoughts that create the anxiety, right? I mean, we've all heard this. It's not the event, but how we interpret the event that creates that stress and that anxiety. And so when we interpret something, obviously we're using our intellect, we're using our thinking, right? And so maybe we'll start with that. There are many modes of thinking, and we have a default thinking that we utilize. It's kind of like a linear type of thinking where it keeps us alive. It makes us succeed in terms of surviving the day, right? And that's, usually asking a question: what should I do in order to get? What should I do X in order to get Y or whatever, right? And so, for example, it's very procedural, right, and linear. So, you talked about that hour that you had, right? And so your most important goal, I guess, or task that day or item on your list was what you were going to do in an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you engaged in what's called strategic thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of strategic thinking, not necessarily strategic thinking as it is practice, say, by, business people or military strategists or anything like that. But it's strategic in a way that you strategize in your day, right? You're making sure that you utilize very effectively every single moment from the moment that you, like, point A to point C, whatever it is that you were, that main event that you had, right? And so what happens with that is you're always asking a question behind that. If I were to ask you what question was behind your decision, the question would probably be like, how can I be effective or efficient, right? So that's your thing, right?
Efficiency, yeah.
So this is where philosophy is important, right? And this is why I incorporate a lot of philosophical techniques. And one of them is simply to break it down and think, okay, what do I mean by efficient? What does that mean to me? You can go to the dictionary and figure out a definition of efficient, but what is it for you, right? And I think very often we don't have an answer for that. We haven't really taken the time to sit down and figure it out, right? So, in other words, what does success look like to you, right? What is that, right? Because it would have been a really successful day if you were able to do all those things in between, point A and the event that you were attending. But how did you measure that success? Obviously, you had some sort of discrepancy there between the way that you were measuring that success, right? And then the task that you have planned to do. And obviously, it sounds to me like you felt like it wasn't that successful, right? Your planning wasn't that successful, right? And that's why it gave you anxiety. So that's one, right? That's basically engaging in, in a Socratic dialogue, which is really questioning all these ideas and concepts and premises that are in your statement, right? And in your idea. In that case, you wanted to do so many things in the name of efficiency before you got to your event. So it's natural to ask questions like, why? What am I gaining from this, right? So to have that conversation with yourself is very healthy. Now, people say, take a deep breath, get present, get in the moment. I get that. I love all that stuff, right? Zen, Buddhism, I love it. But sometimes if you don't have a good grasp on that and you don't practice it often enough, it sounds like a really woo-woo thing out there, right? What does that mean to be present and to be in the moment, right? And to me, that would be, in simple words, to step back, take a step back and say, okay, why, again, question it. What is it that I'm trying to do here? Why am I trying to be efficient today? Why is it so important at this moment when I know I need to get ready for this event, right? It was my goal to utilize every single second so I feel like I'm not wasting time. And if the answer is yes, why do I feel bad about wasting time? What is wasting time for me? So it's a series of questions that you can ask yourself. So you can either struggle with a very distant idea of being present, which I still don't get, being in martial arts for decades and being having a good understanding of Eastern philosophy. I still don't really grasp 100% what is to be present, right? So I wouldn't suggest to somebody that's a novice and trying to understand anxiety and just say, well, feel like, get present and take a deep breath. That doesn't sound like it's going to solve too many of your concerns. So a good way to, instead of spending the time thinking about getting present and struggling with that, spend that minute or two in breaking down your idea. What was it? What was it in there that made you try to achieve so many things in 1 hour? And you kind of knew already that was going to give you anxiety, whether you achieved everything or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's demanding of you. It's demanding a little bit more than just planning, for example, to get in your car and to drive to that event and to do a couple of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's demanding more of you, right?
Yeah.
So what led you to that in the first place? So that's a kind of a mental gymnastics, right? All you have to do is just do some exercises, such as questioning, the reason why you do things. And more often than not, you say, yeah, really, why the fuck am I doing this? I don't really need to do that, right? I don't need to give myself stress. And that's your answer right there. And you take care of your anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as adults, we think that we need to be productive, and we stick with that again. But we haven't taken the time to realize to define for ourselves what productive or efficient means.
Yeah, I like the way you break that down, because a lot of people, they do go to either, reaching out to a family member or a friend or something and just vent and just let it all out, and then they repeat it. Right, so it doesn't matter if it's daily or weekly or monthly or yearly. It's still, the anxiety still comes up. So I love those questions, because the way I approach it, obviously, sometimes I put too much on my plate, but I feel like that was a rare time where I actually felt like the anxiety like really deep within me. Usually, if I feel something coming up, I know how to just not let it get to me. Like, I'm very much like, I'm not going to stress out about this. And I do use a lot of yoga techniques, whether it's asanas, so the postures, the pranayamas, the breathing techniques, right? I think that's very useful for me. Like I said, the way you approach it, to most people who aren't into, the Eastern philosophy and practices, I love that breakdown, because it's almost like an onion, right? You're taking out the layers, because you're going to ask one question, and then another one's going to come up, and then another one, and then another one, until you get down to the core of the why, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like to emphasize for the millionth time that it's not overthinking. So because it sounds like a lot of work in the beginning, it's not overthinking. Overthinking is it's one of those terms, I guess, ideas that people use as an excuse a lot of times to not think, because thinking takes energy, right?
Yeah.
It takes focus. We perceive that it takes a lot of time out of our schedule, and I don't have time for that, right? Like, I have to get shit done. Why am I going to sit? When people think about thinking, they think about, sitting there doing absolutely nothing, looking, staring into the sky and contemplating. We're thinking all the time, right? You can think when you're driving. The secret is to intentionally manage your thinking, not to just let it happen, right? Mm-hmm. So let's make the analogy with our bodies, right? I call it intellectual fitness, because it's just like in our physical fitness, right? Mm-hmm. We take our muscles for granted if we don't work out, right? Okay, so what happens? Nothing good comes out of it, right? There's muscle, you don't atrophy,
use it, you lose it.
Yeah. Invites many other illnesses, disease, conditions, your bones, things to do with your immune system. I let somebody that's more well-versed in that to kind of, give us a good list of all the things that happen when you neglect your muscles, right? Your metabolic, health and all that. So if you do that with your thinking, the same thing's going to happen. You're going to think, oh, I don't need to. I don't really need to. I have muscles. I don't need to work them. I think all the time. I don't need to think about things, right? And then when somebody really realizes, shit, I better get physical, right? Because I'm going to die, basically, or this can actually cure and reverse the symptoms of my diabetes or whatever it is. Then you start getting physical, because it's your first time, you're going to be overwhelmed. Like, people come to me sometimes and say, what can I do to get, just fit? From being on the couch all my life to getting fit. So by giving them 3 ideas, they already feel overwhelmed because that's 3 ideas that they've never were able to fit into their schedule and into their scheme of things. So now they're stressed out about that. So in the beginning, everything is going to feel overwhelming. Think about driving a car, right? In the beginning, you have to not only put your hands on the wheel, you have to look at the mirrors, all 3 mirrors. You have to turn your head. You have to worry about other drivers. You have to shift gears. You have to think about, beeping, blowing that horn if you have to every once in a while. You have to signal. I mean, if this was my first day going to drive, I'd be overwhelmed with that, right? But we know very well that after, a certain amount of hours driving, we don't even know how to get to from A to B, right? So it's the same with everything, right? And so for thinking, again, it's important to develop the habit of controlling your thinking. I hate the word to use the word control because it's not a control. It's not like, oh, I need to control my thoughts, but managing your thoughts, right? When you go into a meeting at work, usually there's an agenda, so you know what we're going to be talking about. When you have a meeting with yourself in your head and you're thinking, have an agenda. What do I want to think about today, right? We do that in a kind of in a very positive sense when we want to daydream. So we want to think about, oh, what if I win the lottery? And just all of a sudden you're just staring into the abyss, and with a happy face you go, oh my God, millions of dollars, I'm traveling all over the world, I'm treating myself. That is a kind of, guided thinking, right? You're self-guided thinking. You're intentionally thinking about something, right? So you can do the same thing with your day, with your anxiety, with anything, right? With politics that we talked about, all the things that are important in our lives, right? So that's the sort of taking ownership. This is why I call this, mental or intellectual fitness, right? And intellectual simply because it's in the intellect that thinking happens, right? It's not about being smart, and so that's important, right? Now to mention to talk about the breath, how important the breath is. So yes, you have a very popularized interpretation of Eastern philosophy that emphasizes practices or around practices like yoga, martial arts that utilize breath. The breath is kind of a central thing in those practices, right? Because breath, from the words that are utilized, prana, ki, chi, breath is the equivalent to the mind and to the spirit, right? So taking a more philosophical approach to that, to breath and the mind and the spirit, this is where I focus on that with my participants, right? And so again, I get them to think about breathing and thinking and how those occur naturally, right? They just happen. We're born breathing, right? Thankfully, we're born thinking, right? And we cannot shut those off at all. And it's not something that we can voluntarily do, right? We pay the consequences seriously if we stop breathing or thinking. And so because they happen naturally, anything that we have that occurs naturally within us or in our lives, we take for granted. We know we do that with relationships, right? You have your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, they're always there with you, your kids maybe, and then you begin to take those relationships for granted in many cases, right? And that's the biggest sign of a dysfunctional relationship, right? That you have with somebody that's in your life. Now, breath and thinking are there in your life, and we develop a dysfunctional relationship in the same way that because we take them for granted. Now, what do I mean by that, right? Just because we're breathing doesn't mean that we're breathing optimally. Like we're muscles. Just because we have muscles doesn't mean that the muscles are going to grow on their own. You have to work at them. Same thing with your breath, right? And so breathing has to be managed and it has to be intentional. And we know already that there's a lot of health concerns that are derived from incorrect breathing, what's known as mouth breathing, right? Mouth breathing can create a whole bunch of, health concerns. And then, so that's something that is 100% preventable. That doesn't require any major skills. It just requires the awareness and the time that you dedicate to correcting your breathing and making sure it's through your nose, through your mouth, and you have that, right? And so what are the consequences if you don't? And if you just become lazy about your breathing, you can start breathing shallow and through your mouth, and that's going to invite a whole bunch of things like interfering with your sleep and stuff like that, right? Same thing with your thinking, right? Now we get into the anxiety part. Anxiety is really the result of chaotic thinking, right? And so overthinking, or I guess I can call it hyperthinking, just like hyperventilating. You're taking a lot of like, very, like fast-paced kind of breathing through your mouth, right? That creates anxiety, but it's also a sign of anxiety, right? And the same thing with your overthinking, your hyperthinking, right? It doesn't mean that you're thinking a lot. You're just thinking in a way that's chaotic, right? And it seems like a lot, but it's chaotic. That's basically what it is. So how do I get those? Why do I talk about those two? Because they follow the same laws, if you will, right? The laws of not taking it for granted, the laws of, being able to intentionally control them or manage them. So if you manage your breath, and practices like yoga and martial arts and these practices, they just talk about the breath part, right? And that's enough to get your mind to be calm, right? I'm just going a step further and just telling you what happens when you are breathing and managing your breathing intentionally. That calms your mind because your mind is exactly like your breathing. It's something that occurs naturally, right? You can do, and the reason I go there is because you can do the same thing. You can actually work on your thinking, and your breathing will also be perfect, right? Because they're together, right?
Yeah.
So somebody that can have a really calm way of approaching their thinking and stuff like that is usually somebody that's not breathing like that. Is somebody that's breathing normally, right? Or correctly, I should say, right? So there's lots to explore there. I know in like a few minutes trying to explain that might seem to people, I don't even want to think about all the stuff that this guy's talking about. But it's part of something that I do with people, through several sessions, right? To get to that, to get the concept, the understanding of that, to grasp it, and then begin to practice it, which is where we spend most of the time. Practicing that, practicing intentional thinking, and practicing intentional breath work.
So for someone who goes through, because again, what I experienced was very minor, and I know a lot of people who have the vata, the air and ether constitution, the dosha in elevated in Ayurveda. They tend to, their mind doesn't stop thinking, and they tend to perpetuate really anxious thoughts. And a lot of imbalanced vata people tend to also have insomnia. And again, it perpetuates, right? The shallow breathing, the constant thinking, the anxiety, the lack of sleep. So I know that with Ayurveda, there's a lot of yoga practices that they offer in addition to the pranayamas, the breathing, and also what you eat is very important. So like with someone who has an elevated vata imbalance, we again, it's never one size fits all. You always want to customize this for them, but majority of the time you are offering people grounding food. So like sweet potatoes, pumpkins, potatoes, very grounding foods, and warm liquids, constantly drinking warm fluids, not cold. So is this something within your practice that because you're very knowledgeable when it comes to nutrition. Is this something that you also touch on with your participants?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to take a holistic approach, right?
Yeah.
So somebody comes to see me and they're super stressed out, like you described, like never stop thinking, and they're at a point where their life seems like chaos and anxiety is present all the time. It's time to first sit down and have a look at what, if they have a good support network, right? So are you seeing your doctor? You should be seeing your doctor, right? Because sometimes if it's a hormonal imbalance, or if it's even an injury that, might have been there for a long time, let's say that you have like a knee injury and it's been bothering you, it's interfering with your sleep, that can interfere with, levels of energy, and then you're drinking more coffee, and then you're more anxious, and this, that, and because you can't exercise, all that energy that's, inside, it doesn't manifest in a healthy way. So there's many things that are taking place at the same time. In other words, you have neglected your your well-being for a while before you get to that stage, right?
Mhm.
And so are you seeing your doctor, making sure that everything, that your vitamins and minerals, all those are where they should be? Are you maybe seeing a therapist? And a therapist is somebody that can help you organize your emotions,
Mhm.
right? And so the therapist will help you with that. Are there any situations that have triggered some emotional turmoil and emotional chaos that you can begin to reassemble?
Mhm.
Are you eating well, right? Or are you seeing a nutritionist or a naturopathic doctor, right? If not, are you at least going on YouTube and finding out what healthier eating is? Are you eating whole foods, right? If people have some food intolerances, food allergies and things like that, so I would definitely recommend going to somebody that's a professional nutritionist or
Mhm.
somebody that has to do with that, so that they can recommend the right foods. But you can also do it on your own, right? Start
Yeah.
with making better choices. Start exercising, right? Now let's talk about your anxiety, because now that you've taken care of all those things, right? Okay, so you mentioned, do you have a physical practice where you can allow your body to take that energy and utilize it, right, in the right way? Now, we can take care of all that, as I say, from the neck down, but what happens to that busy head, right, the busy mind? Then you also have to address it, right? Because most people go, okay, I feel great, I'm eating better, my doctor says all my vitamins and minerals are good, I lost a couple of pounds, I got more energy, I'm good. I'm like, I know you're good now, but this thing is going to catch up to you because you did not take the time to work on that as well.
Mhm.
I don't know why we think that. If people, I guess some people see the brain and the body as one thing and they don't think of the mind at all. And then they see the brain as this place where all the mental activity takes place. Great, because maybe they're addressing their brain health along with their exercise and their nutrition. But most of us have an understanding of mind and body, right? And the body and the mind are two different things, right?
Yeah.
And so when we don't see the mind because the mind is not visible and we don't know where it is in terms of a bodily location, then we neglect it, right? We think, okay, again, I'm eating better, I'm exercising now, I'm all good to go, right? And so having a practice, and that's where I come in, right? After, addressing, that's not where I started already working with somebody with their nutrition and their support network and all that. But now let's take it one step further and let's talk about your intellect. What's going on there, right? What's going on? What are you thinking? Because I know for a fact, I've mentioned this before, it is understood that about 97% of all of our thoughts in one day are repetitive, meaning we're thinking the same thing we've been thinking for a long time.
Mhm.
In addition to that, 75% of our thoughts are negative. So it doesn't take long to figure out that what we are thinking in one day, pretty much every day, is a negative, repetitive type of thinking, right? And so if we haven't taken the time to look at that, right, it's going to always be there, right? And so you mentioned people that are always thinking, they have a hard time turning it off, and most of that thinking is negative, right?
Mhm.
And when we have a lot of negative thoughts, our thinking is on speed, right? On like high speed. Why? Because we feel the need that we need to solve these problems, because anything that's negative, raises the red flag that there is a problem. And so we go into solving a problem mode all the time. So we are trying to get some sleep at the same time that we're trying to solve this problem. Although there might be problems, we all have challenges in our lives. Most of these perceived problems are simply because of a feeling of something negative going on. And that negative thing going on makes you feel like you need to solve it, right? Solve a problem, right? So we need to work with the content of your thinking, of your intellect. What's in your intellect? If you picture your intellect as a container, what have you been putting in there? Most people will have to say, because we can spend a whole session maybe writing down what are some of the main sources of information that the person is consuming, right? Countless hours of social media, scrolling up and down. Can you scroll up as well? Yeah.
Yep.
Well, scrolling down, whatever. Anyway, scrolling on social media, horrible videos of violence, horrible videos of the sort of the Karen phenomenon going on, and
But also political issues that are happening today,
and
right?
I would have said that. And the guy yelled at her and called her a bitch, and she turned around and called him an asshole, and things that have nothing to do with what we need to get done in our lives, right? And so that's one. Then there's, the big media corporations pumping us full of negative shit. There's an earthquake here.
Yeah.
There's a big Oregon. All of a sudden is supposed to be this terrorist
Same as
breeding
Chicago.
ground in the United States. It's all negative, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something else that you're feeding, right? Then let's have a look at now what kind of thinking, what kind of thoughts do you have in your mind to create what we call thinking? Well, I just named it, right? And so no wonder and add to that the fact that you have to balance your budget at home, you have to pay the rent, you have to buy food, you have an asshole for a boss, and you're not getting along with your coworkers. When you throw that together, that's what we call chaos. And this is exactly what people feel, as you were saying. They have a chaotic thing going on in their heads, right? So how do we reestablish order? How do we reestablish a harmony and a balance in our minds, right? We begin with that, right? We begin with first stopping the consumption of so much junk. It's no different from your body, right? You mentioned nutrition, right? When we eat crap, we end up feeling like crap, right? And so we do that. And then, then we begin to think of, okay, now what can I replace that with, right? I mean, there's so many things that you can do to replace that information with good information. I mean, just talking about this is thinking 101, right? Just clearing your mind and trying to find clarity 101. And it sounds complicated right now because you're doing a kind of a purging and.
So yeah, how do you clear your mind?
So there's no such thing as clearing your mind.
Okay.
There's no such thing as I'm going to take a deep breath and push the button and all of a sudden, my mind is clear,
gone.
right?
Yeah.
You can maybe imagine it, and that's good. Maybe use an imagery to do that, but there's no such thing. Your thoughts are still there, right? You finish your meditation, you're still going to be thinking about the rent and your paycheck and blah blah blah, right? So what you need to do is you need to begin to spend more time feeding your mind with the right information and the right thinking, right? And really do a diet, as people say, an informational diet, right? So where you start to think, okay, do I need to consume this from social media or not, right? Do I need to watch the news every day? Some people would say maybe reading books, that might work for them. Having good conversations with people, like we're having a conversation right now that maybe not everybody is having, right? You can have that with somebody or you can have that with yourself, right? And you can also have the same process that I discovered that I mentioned earlier. You question what you're thinking, right? And by questioning what you're thinking, you're already introducing new thinking. That question itself is a new type of thinking, right? It's new information that enters your mind. And so this is not something that when we say clearing your mind, I'm sorry, people, you can't clean your mind in one day or one meditation session or 5 for that matter.
If it's during meditation,
it takes to create a habit, right? It takes to create a habit, and one day you practice less social media, then the next day you practice less violent social media, then the next day you practice less political social media. What we conceive it's political, it's all crap out there. Then you also begin to practice, things like questioning better. You wake up in the morning and you grab your pen and paper and you write 5 questions that you never asked yourself before. That's a really good practice.
I love that.
I love questions. To me, they're what push-ups are to the body, right? Because they push your mind to find the answers, right? And so your mind is going to look for the answers. It's not going to find it in the Karens and the Karen lady that was trying to tell somebody not to park wherever, that's not going to be the answer. It's not going to be in that information you have stored. The answer is not going to be in Donald Trump saying that they're, left-wing terrorists in the States or anything like that. The answer is going to be somewhere else. And so you're going to now have to seek out information that is directed not by a question, right? And that information is going to be very good or information that that's going to occupy your intellect. So now you're replenishing your crappy thinking with good thoughts, good information, good thinking. And guess what? Because it's repetitive, you're going to be thinking about this more. And the more you think about it, the more you're going to feel like, wow, this is really working. I feel different. I'm thinking more positively. I'm thinking more optimistically. In fact, I think that my thinking is it's not that bad right now, right?
Yeah.
So you can't stop thinking and you cannot clear your mind. But what you can do is engage in a habitual practice of better thinking. And I explained to what better thinking is to some degree. But again, there are many other ways of improving your thinking. And to me, thinking modes are very important, because once you understand how to shift your thinking from one type of thinking to another type of thinking, you are in thinking heaven. Because right now you have so many more tools to think better.
That makes sense, because for a long time, many years ago, I used to always think the worst case scenario. That was always my go-to, worst case scenario. And then I would always be stressed about that. And then I shifted that to being in a place of gratitude. What am I grateful for? Instead of, okay, what do I need? What do I lack? No. I think sometimes we need to just stop and think about what we have and what we're grateful for. So that makes sense, because when you start practicing that more, there's more, you attract more goodness into your life, right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to add that. So gratitude is a type of thinking, right? It's a reflective type of thinking. You're forcing yourself to look for, again, you're asking questions. What am I grateful for, right?
Yeah.
That's the question behind. So you start thinking, oh, nothing right now. That's the old you. And now if you came to me, you're trying to change that, right? You're trying to transform into your new you. The new you is going to begin to answer those questions. Even if you have one answer, well, I'm grateful that I'm alive. Good. Think about that for a while, right? Think about it throughout the day. When you get so good at practicing gratitude every day and incorporating other types of thinking, this is what happens. Now you're able to tap into those types of thinkings throughout the day. As you are thinking about your shitty job and you are thinking about your shitty paycheck, you're also incorporating some of that seamlessly, right? So for example, let's say that you have your gratitude thinking so on point that right now all of a sudden you look at your picture, you go, fuck. And then all of a sudden your gratitude thinking kicks in and you go, and you articulate it differently, right?
Yeah.
You might say something like, wow, this is not what I was expecting, but whatever, but I'm so grateful that I also have my health and I have my family and my friends. I'm gonna go hang out with my friends right now, and I'll just deposit this check. And when I get home, maybe I'm gonna do a budget, maybe a better budget or something like that, or maybe I'll go online to look for different. It's a different way to approach your problems now. You're approaching your problems from a much more broader kind of a way of looking at things, right?
And so what would you recommend, I know that you're not like a therapist or anything, but for someone that's taking your program, do you have anything with respect to offer, because you had mentioned having your support group, aside from a doctor, do you give any advice to them with respect to how to reach out to people, like tools in that sense, where if they're feeling really overwhelmed, who to reach out to, their person? Is that something that you discuss with your participants?
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice doesn't really focus on trying to, that does touch a little bit more on therapy, right? Let's make sure that we do have the right person for you. Who do you know, Peter? Okay, what's Peter like? And make sure that it's, emotionally safe for you. That's not really my scope, but it is my first approach would be to, let's have a look at what you got and what's your world like right now, right? Do you have a support network? Do you have friends that you can talk to, right? And the reason I say that is because then we get into looking at a daily practice that will actually change your life and take control of your thinking and control of your behavior. And that is when we get into the principles that you follow, the principles that you live by, right? Those are typically ethical, moral principles, right? And those will act as filters for your friendships, for your support, for all those things that, as you say, you might be concerned that you might not be getting the right support or might not be talking to the right people, right? Now, if somebody's concerned and they say to me, well, I have my friend Maria, but she's always so negative, I'm not going to say, well, maybe you shouldn't be talking to Maria. It's not my place to say it. But it is my place to equip that person with the tools and a set of rules that they live by, that will naturally in time maybe filter out people like Maria in their lives, or at least edit their participation in their lives, right? the way that they participate in the quality of their lives. So I hope that answers your question. But so community is very important, and I'm glad that you touched on that, right? Because community is one of those things that it's absolutely a must for people. This is what I have in my program, right? So in my program we have the coaching, which is talking to people, present them with these ideas. There's kind of a little bit of an educational aspect involved, right? With new concept, things like that. There's a lot of practicing, right? Because we're trying to create habits. If you don't develop the habit of breathing right or thinking right, you're never going to develop it, right? If you don't develop the habit of eating right, you're always going to be saying, oh, I wish I could eat right. If you don't develop the habit of working out, you're always going to be saying, oh, I wish I could work out. So we do that, right? So there's a lot of practicing in our coaching calls. And there's also the courses that I've created are kind of a really good foundation for this. So if somebody feels kind of lost, thinking, okay, well, how does this apply? They can check, the material in the courses, right?
Nice.
So there's one course that is a course that it's, specifically understanding the principles of intellectual fitness, and what that means and how to apply it. It's very important. So they can always go back and check their materials before they come to a coaching session. And then we have the course that addresses anxiety altogether, right? And that's the FUCK course, or Fuck Anxiety, or FUCK Anxiety. And that's very important because it's a really broad understanding of, anxiety. We get to understand all types of anxiety and how to work with it, how to understand them yourself, and how to control or how to manage your thinking on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
As it applies to anxiety, right? And so with the foundation of those two, now when you come to the coaching sessions, now we're talking the same language, right? And so it's just like anything else. Your personal trainer might give you some information for you to read. So when you come to your personal trainer session, now you know what a push-up is, you know what a squat is, and that kind of thing. And now you're talking the same language. Now you can get to developing the habit of doing that. In addition to that, we have the community, right? The community of all the students that join. And so the cool thing about a community like that is that we're all on the same journey, or a similar journey, and they're all talking the same language, right? And they all have feedback for each other. They have there's some great ideas that I haven't thought about as the instructor myself. And wow, this is great, right? This is the beautiful thing about community. There's emotional support, and there's support with a lot of ideas. That's something that I've taken the time to create the whole environment, let's say the whole ecosystem, for people that are experiencing anxiety, or they're struggling with their thinking, they're overthinking, or they just simply want to improve on their thinking because they understand, how important thinking is, right, in life. Having said that, any community, it's, community at large, farmers markets, go to places where there's music, where there's art, go to join a gym, or go to a particular sports event, join a team or whatever, wherever there's a group of people, typically, like-minded people that are pursuing common interests, it's a very supportive environment, right? It allows people to actually, believe it or not, to develop a group identity, but also at the same time, it pushes them to think about their own individual identity, right, against the group versus the group. A very healthy relationship there, right?
Yeah. Well, I do have to say before we go that even though I have the tools and the years of practice with pranayamas and yoga and meditation, you really helped me out yesterday when I was feeling really overwhelmed, and I did get to ask myself a lot of great questions, especially like, why do I do this to myself, right?
Right.
So I do appreciate that. And for anyone out there that is looking for support and a great program to follow, certainly take a look at the link that's going to be on this podcast.
Yeah. So I think for me, the most important thing, because I've been doing this for so many years and I've been thinking about this for so long, again, it might seem overwhelming. It might seem that there's a lot of new information and new things. My ultimate mission, I guess, with all this is to finally create a very healthy and very harmonious inner dialogue with the person, right? So we all have that inner dialogue, right, when we talk to ourselves. And it when it's out of control, it's one of the most abusive type of dialogues and conversations we can have. That, as you've heard the expression, if you were to tell your friends what you're telling yourself, you wouldn't have any friends, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's at the end the most important thing. When the person has, let's say, I graduated from the program and they have kind of grasped all the concepts and been able to develop a good habit of thinking well, that leads to a very healthy, very functional dialogue with themselves. And so they end up developing a very functional relationship with themselves. I think that's what, what I like people to think about, that's what they need to look forward to. And that's something that they obtain at the end of this. And that's something that, regardless whether you take this, my coaching, my course or not, or anybody's for that matter, I think, this is something that people should be striving to achieve on their own anyways, to have a better conversation with themselves. One that's healthier, one that's based on love and passion and forgiveness and flexibility, instead of, trying to duplicate the harshness that they encounter in the world.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for all that you do, George. You really do have a positive impact to everyone that connects with you and all your participants. We're lucky to have you. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And next episode, we will have a wonderful guest, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yay.
Have a great day.
So long, everybody.
Cheers.